Hey guys, it's Chris with Nichols Retirement Empire. I'm driving home. I'm going to do a little fishing here for a few days. And I've been trying to make a couple of videos, and I'm kind of going from here to there and rambling on and talking about all kind of crazy stuff. But I think I'm going to call this one. This is a kind of one of the nightmares from the 70s kind of time frame videos, and I'm going to call it That Mill. That Mill. If you lived in North Georgia, and a lot of places around the South, but just since I'm from North Georgia, I'll talk about that. When you lived in North Georgia, chances were back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that you lived in a town where there was a mill. Probably a textile mill, may have been something else. But it's just so crazy how impactful those mills were back then. Like where my parents lived in Rossville, the guy that owned the mill pretty much ran everything. I mean, he paid for all the recreation stuff for all the kids to be able to play football and basketball and baseball and all that kind of stuff in town. And the town was full of people because of that mill. The town was full of people and mill housing. And, there's a lot of negative things about it and stuff too, because you would have situations where you'd have mill stores and company stores, especially mining towns and stuff like that, where people would be kind of, where you couldn't get out of it. You'd be stuck in a situation where you're pretty much owned by the company, by the mine, and by the mill. But they weren't all like that. Most of them, especially after so many years, you had all the mill housing that was cheap and affordable. If you were a mill worker, you could afford a mill house. Now, were they living in luxury? No, but there were jobs. Not only did you have the mill jobs, but you had all the supporting jobs that the mill created, and everything kind of, in that town kind of revolved around the mill. All the people were there because of the mill. My mom's grandparents were from Alabama. When they grew up pretty much as farmers, they moved to that area to work at the mill. Everybody, unless you were had some kind of outside job, like you were a truck driver or something, worked there or worked at something that wouldn't have existed if the mill hadn't have been there. It wouldn't have been a town, or there wouldn't have been much of a town. The high school, like I said, the rumor was Rossville High School, they were really good in football back in the 50s and 60s. That the guy that owned the mill would pay, would have jobs where he would bring people in and give them jobs so that if their son was a real good football player or something, so that they could come play at the school. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm sure it probably was. But it made the school athletic program a lot better. And that school had, for that period of time, Rossville High School had plenty of money, for that time. And it was a very nice school. It was a really nice school. People wanted to go there. People wanted to live in that town, kind of a thing. What's so crazy is when I was a kid, the mill was still running, but it wasn't owned by the same company. And my dad never worked at the mill. My mom never worked at the mill. By the time they got out of high school, the economy had taken a downturn and things were changing, but the mill was going down. It was just a matter of time. And nobody was working there like before. It wasn't as many people. It wasn't, the economy, like I said, overall was getting bad. But what's so amazing is that my parents and most of their siblings spent the majority of their life living within at the most 20 miles from that mill. Everybody just lived there. They all still live there, um, with the exception of a few of them, the ones that are still alive. But they've always lived. My family has always lived. My grandparents never lived, starting in the 1950s, probably never lived more than 5 miles from that mill. Even when the mill was shut down and gone, they still lived right there. As short a period of time as that was, and it's the same thing in a lot of these towns, whether it was 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever, when these mills were here, it was just a way of life in these towns. And you go into a lot of them now, and you got the same thing across the United States. And that's part of the way the economy changes over time. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, the economy never stays the exact same. But for that period of time, you had that kind of common, way of life around, kind of semi-rural areas, because these weren't always. I'm not talking about big cities where they had mills. I'm talking about like where it would be like the town, and it was the mill. The mill was the town. I'm talking about those kind of places. Those places are still there, but it's like they're not the same. A lot of the people, like I said, the older people still live there. There's no jobs. You have to go out somewhere else to get a job, and it may be close by. It may just be 5 or 10 miles down the road. It may not be that big a deal. But in some places, you may have to go an hour or 2 hours to get to somewhere else where there's a job. So it's just a disappeared, gone way of life that was very common all over the place. Everywhere I've ever lived, there was a mill that at one time was open and operating in that town. Just about every single little town. It's just really strange to go back and look at it. And the reason I thought of it was I was talking about in one of my videos that I was going to make, I was talking about going into the barbershop, and how that, we had like 3 elementary schools in our little town. You can go down to the barbershop and there'd be like 5 or 6 barbers lined up working in the barbershop on a Saturday, or in the afternoon. You'd go in there and they'd just be lined up, and all these men, people would be waiting in line, all sitting waiting for their turn to get their hair cut. And you could smell it. It didn't matter where you went. It didn't matter what part of Georgia or Alabama, North Alabama, wherever it was you went. If you went into one of those barbershops, they smelled the same. They smelled like shaving cream. They smell like the powder with the little brushes that they brush the hair, to get the hair off of you when you got through with your haircut. They smell like tonic, that they would keep the combs and all the stuff in, and they would clean, or the alcohol kind of stuff that they would clean their scissors and combs in. They smell like smoke. They smell like tobacco. And they sounded the same. The barber chairs were pretty much the same in all of them. It was just a place where you could go. They would be the same everywhere, in every little mill town or the farming towns. The same conversations, the same haircuts. You look on the wall, they'd have a little poster, and it would have the different kind of haircuts that you could get. And what would be so funny is that poster would be like from the 50s. That poster might be 20 or 30 years old. But those were the options, the haircut options that you had when you went into the barbershop. And the men, that were in there would always be men that were veterans of World War II back then, Korea, Vietnam, and all that. You'd have all those men. If they had tattoos, there would be one tattoo. It wouldn't be like it is now, where you'd have a whole arm sleeve tattoo. It'd be, USMC or a Navy tattoo, or a woman tattoo of a woman, something weird like that on their arm. And the kids didn't go in there and play and cry. And when you went in there, you kept your mouth shut. The barber told you to be still. The barber would tell you something like, no, if you're not still, I'm gonna cut you with these scissors. And you might get cut with the scissors if you wasn't still. It was dangerous. But I don't know. Like when you went in there, you just had you're like a little man, getting your hair cut. And I hadn't been in a barbershop like that in decades. But that's the way it was. That's the way it was in all of those towns. It's like they were just like their own little world. Most of them had places, where you could buy clothes. And on into the 70s and stuff, they would have like a Sears, or, if it was a big enough town, they'd have like, that's back before, you might have had a Kmart later on or something like that. But it was back before all the Walmarts and stuff were gone. So you had stores where you buy your clothes. You had usually hardware stores. You had feed and seed hardwares, or just feed and seed stores. Places that worked on your cars. They had their grocery stores. There wasn't any reason. There wasn't anywhere you needed to go other than, if your mill town was big enough, your mill town had enough of an economy to have everything there that you could need. And I guess that's why most of those people, what's bad now is you have a lot of those older people, and they still live there, and none of that stuff is there. None of the, like Rossville, none of the stores to buy clothes are still there. None of the grocery stores are there anymore. None of the hardware stores are there anymore. Most of the restaurants are not there anymore. It's nothing there. Those were unique places to live, I guess, and a unique time to live. But anyway, just wanted to do a video about that meal and the effect, that it had on so many people. And now it's gone. Now they're gone. You look at them and they're just these big, huge, empty buildings. Now a lot of them may have been converted to where they're like storage facilities or something like that. But used to, they were the economic engine that just drove everything within miles and miles. But things change, don't they? Thanks for watching Nichols Retirement Empire, guys.